Hey, welcome everybody to the Wealth for 99 podcast. My apologies on the delay. It has been a very busy Monday, but glad you guys came by. We've got an interesting line of topics to get through today. We're going to be talking about why it is that all these YouTubers, especially, are talking about leaving California. We're going to be talking about the rhetoric around quote unquote welfare states and what the analytics actually have to say about that. We're going to talk about the Trump economy and a lot of the numbers behind it, and basically just evaluate what it has done, relatively speaking to the his predecessor. And then we're going to talk about the Gini Coefficient, which is it's a economic and mathematical method of measuring inequality within a society, and why that's important for us to look at. And then we're going to look at 5 different credit cards that I think are pretty good for the average person to look into if you're looking to get started on, earning credit card bonuses, earning credit card points, and you just want to make sure that you're able to stretch your dollar a little bit further and get some free benefits on the side. So, as always, I'm going to be doing this and going over each topic one by one. In between the topics, I will be talking to people in the chat. So if you have any questions or comments or whatever, put those in the chat, and I will be sure to get to those in between topics. And in just a moment, I will get started on the first one. Okay, so for the first topic today, what we're going to be talking about is the leaving California storyline that we've been seeing on YouTube increasingly of late. And we're going to be talking about that rhetoric overall of the California quote unquote exodus and what the numbers have to say about that. So I know lately we've seen people like, especially people that are on YouTube. I can't go for the past couple months. I can't go like a couple days without seeing someone post something about how they or someone else is leaving California. And the main ones that I'm going to be talking about are, of course, Joe Rogan, who left to go to Texas after getting his Spotify deal, where he is getting paid $100 million, so you want to save on those taxes. Graham Stephan, who we all know, is the perennial finance YouTuber, is moving to Las Vegas. Conservative pundit Ben Shapiro is another example. And then we all heard, if we're on Twitter, we know about Elon Musk talking about his dissatisfaction with especially Alameda County and the state of California. So we're going to be talking about those 4 specific cases, but then also that overall. So the different reasons that each of them gave for wanting to leave California with the places that they were going were that Rogan wanted to move to Austin, Texas, and the reason for him was because it saves him basically $13 million on the Spotify deal. Makes pretty good sense if you're in his shoes. Graham talked about he's moving to Vegas, and he talked about how taxes. I know that also, and on that note, I know a couple weeks ago, and you should definitely check it out if you haven't already and you haven't voted yet in the state of California, is Prop 15, the increase in tax on real estate, assuming that prop passes. That will most likely affect someone like Graham, depending on how old his properties are, but pretty much guarantee it since most of his were bought during, or at least he started building during the last recession. So those will be affected for sure. And then also he stated that he had different safety concerns, with the crime rates and the unrest, quote unquote, that he saw within the Los Angeles area. Then third, you have Ben Shapiro, and Ben Shapiro moved him and his company Daily Wire to Nashville, Tennessee. And of course, he's a conservative pundit. His bugaboo was essentially that there were these liberal policies that were ruining the state. So we'll go into that. And then Musk has been talking about moving Tesla to either Nevada or Texas with citing taxes and quote unquote freedom. So we're going to look at all of these, and let's keep in mind that none of these people are representative of the average person. So that's going to be a really important key to remember when we're looking at these data points. Now, as I just laid out, the common arguments are, taxes, liberal policies, and then we also have the sister piece of rhetoric to everyone's leaving California to everyone's leaving California to come to Texas. So, and or the other red states that have lower taxes. So let's look at these claims. So first off, you have all of these videos, and it seems like every one of them, they talk about how California has a 13% income tax, and that this is such a problem because the income tax is so high, right? And that's going to push people out of the state. The problem with that argument is that it doesn't really make sense when you look at the numbers and you look at, well, what is the reasoning for that? Specifically, when we look at California's tax rates, we can see, and I'll pull that up. When we look at California's tax rates, we can see that these tax brackets and this 13.3% income tax rate that they're talking about is only on every dollar you earn after $1 million per year. Now, don't get me wrong. California has high taxes. There's no question there. But arguing that a top marginal rate on income over $1 million a year is going to cause a mass exodus from California doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because I don't know about you, but there's not very many people making over $1 million a year. And then we got to keep in mind is when you look at the tax rates and we look at, say, what really matters is how much do you keep, right? That's what we really care about. And when we want to look and see, let's look at different states and let's see what those other states, comparatively look like. And first of all, in California, you get a higher deduction than the other states anyway, because the standard deduction in state of California is $4,000 individual, $8.4 thousand joint, which that is also something to consider. So even until then, you're already writing that much off on top of, so that goes along with the same as you writing off the standard deduction on your federal income tax. So if you're someone that's interested, that's where that starts. So it's every dollar after that before it even starts to count. As for looking at other states and looking at, well, okay, what is the actual tax burden, right? Basically, because we don't, as normal people, we don't really care what the top marginal rate is. It doesn't really affect us. What we want to know, at least not affect us directly. It affects the amount of funding that the state and country gets, which is something that matters, but it doesn't affect us directly. What we want to look at is what is the, actual tax burden that we are going to face. So let's look as an example at these different states' median pays and median tax burdens, right? So as an example, since we're looking at these specific states, let's look at California first of all. And when we do that, okay, so we can see California, and so this is ranked based on the annual salary take-home. So this is looking at what is the median take-home pay, so the median post-tax pay that you get in each state, and it's ranked in descending order. So we're looking at what is the states with the most pay after taxes are New Jersey, Maryland, Massachusetts, Washington, Hawaii, and you see how this list works. So California has the 6th highest after-tax take-home pay, and this is a median take-home pay. That's important to remember, not a mean. So this isn't going to be as highly influenced by high earners that, of course, are going to move that average up if you're looking at just the mean. So that's important to keep in mind. And when we're looking at it, what's our actual total tax burden? And this is the total tax burden. This is not income tax only. This is all the different state taxes combined together for a composite average. And you're looking at about 25.3 as your tax burden, right? So that's what we're looking at when we're talking about the median person's tax burden. Now, let's look as an example at, say, let's go down this list and let's say, okay, what we have to beat is 25.37, right? And we can see Maryland's taxed even higher. So is Massachusetts. So is Hawaii. Hawaii, I think, is the highest other than DC. And then when we're looking, let's get down to where Texas and we see New York's about the same as California. No surprise there. And then let's get down to, okay, cool, Texas. So when we're looking at Texas, here's the thing to keep in mind. The tax burden, percent-wise, is lower, no question. The difference is that when we're looking at what is the median income, i.e., if I'm someone who's moving from one state to another state, the reason I would move to a state like California or one with a, higher median salary is because it increases my earning potential, especially if I'm a younger person, because then if I then move back to a state with a lower cost of living, like Texas, then I will be able to ask for pay that is close to the same amount that I'm making, which nominally looks the same, but is going to be effectively a pay increase. Whereas if I were to start out in Texas, I would start off with a lower pay on average than if I started off in California, and it would be very difficult for me to ever move to a state with a higher cost of living because of that lower nominal pay. All cases are different, and you'll have to look at yours specifically. This is definitely the case within engineering and within most non-seniority based jobs that I've seen. Then when we're going to look at, say, Nevada, same thing. We're looking, Nevada's so far down the list. I mean, we're talking, that's at 21? It's 21 down the list of median pay. Something to keep in mind. Now, taxes are not the only thing that matters, because we also will have to look at the outcomes that, come out of these states. But I'll do that in the next topic whenever I'm looking at the different states, the differences between red and blue states when it comes to federal and state budget dependency. So the main thing to keep in mind there is it's not, millionaires are not representative of the population as a whole. That's the main thing to keep in mind, and to take their advice with a grain of salt when they're talking about taxes. Now, when we are looking at liberal policies, right, which is something that that Ben Shapiro, of course, talks about, and others have talked about, what we want to keep in mind here is that what's he talking about, right? And I do want to point out that it is pretty funny to me because if you don't know, Ben Shapiro used to work for Breitbart, which is another another pretty far right-leaning media outlet. And Andrew Breitbart, the guy who started that, as well as Ben Shapiro, have lived in Los Angeles, California for their entire lives. So while their career has been predicated on complaining about these, blue areas and states, they've chosen to live there the entire time. And I have to admit that it's pretty funny when we just look at, and let's just laugh for a second at, if your goal, Ben, was to move away from liberal policies, there are a lot of cities and a lot of different states you could have chosen. And it's okay to choose Tennessee. It makes sense. They have zero income tax. That's probably the main reason he chose it. But here's the reality. Take a guess which of these political districts Ben moved to. It's this one. This is Davidson County in Tennessee. This is where Nashville is. It's right with Memphis. Memphis went 2% more to Hillary Clinton in 2016. It's basically the bluest place in that state. So all I'm going to say is I've lived in a lot of red states, a lot of red districts. Most of my life has been spent in red districts. I know what it's like to live in those, and I'm not even making a judgment call on it. I'm just saying I actually do. Ben doesn't. Ben has never lived in a conservative area in his entire life, and it's pretty funny to see. That's all. Now, with Elon, the other thing we want to look at is Elon, though, to me is the funniest. So I think that overall that Tesla is pretty cool. I'm an engineer, so growing up, and going through school, of course, you look up and you're like, oh man, Elon Musk, this is awesome. You see a guy who's pushing, tech, essentially, in the forefront. And that's an awesome thing to see. That being said, his love-hate relationship with California is extremely ironic to me. To put this in perspective, so Musk, when the lockdowns were happening in the state of California earlier this year, Musk was very upset about that and he went on some Twitter tirades, and then also basically broke the Alameda County curfew by having employees come into work even though they weren't allowed to. And he essentially threatened that he's going to move Tesla headquarters to Nevada or Texas or some other state. And what's really funny about that is that specifically Texas, it doesn't really, as a person who's a longtime follower of, Elon Musk's career, in 2015, Elon Musk was constantly raving, and rightfully so, about the state of Texas because Texas basically banned him from selling Teslas in the state because their lobbying essentially had set it up so that you couldn't, because they had such strong representation, car dealerships did, you couldn't sell cars unless you were doing it through a dealership within the state. So because they were wanting to do wanting to do a direct consumer sales strategy, Tesla essentially would not let the company sell their cars in that manner in the state. So all I'm saying is, I don't know that Elon necessarily has a problem with a state in particular or, the political affiliation within that state. He just has a problem whenever people tell him that he can't do what he wants to do. Sometimes that's right, sometimes that's wrong, but the point is, let's just call a spade a spade. As for Nevada, cool, do whatever you want, dude. But I do think it's really important to keep in mind that, and I know I've talked about this before, is in 2012, whenever Romney was running against Obama, as an example, I remember hearing Romney constantly rant and rave about how Tesla, was just propped up by the government, just basically surviving on that funding, not on VC, venture capital, not on making profits. And he was right. And in my opinion, there's nothing really wrong with that, because I think that's the goal, is the government should be investing in companies that are going to hopefully make things better. However, if you're Elon Musk, it looks pretty bad to me that you take a lot of money from both the U.S. government and even more so the state of California, because no other state would have helped bankroll him the way that California has, whether it's through EV subsidies or direct, incentives to move to certain areas. Maybe you should remember, who butters your bread, my dude. And that's just something to keep in mind with Elon Musk. But it's mostly harmless. He's not going, I don't see that happening anytime soon. Now, the third main argument that we want to talk about is poverty and homelessness. So this is something that Graham brought up, as did Shapiro, and both of them, if you live in California, you've heard people talk about this, mostly people that don't live here, talk about rampant needles on the sidewalk and tent cities everywhere. And they also talk about, rampant crime. Yet the irony behind that is that Nevada, Tennessee, and Texas all actually have higher crime rates than California. So, and that is according to 2020 data. That's not that's not a cherry-picked field, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So on the other side of the screen, you can see this is looking at crime rate by state, and the darker it is, the more crime that they have. And as we can look here, we can see that California is at a homicide rate of 4.6. This is per 100,000 residents. Okay, so 4.6, 7.9 on homicide rate and firearms death rate, right? So now let's see what these, states that Graham moved to. With Nevada, 9.1 and 16.8, basically double, right? Not only that, North Las Vegas has the highest crime rate of any city in the state of Nevada. I don't think he moved because of crime. As for Tennessee, same deal. You're looking at almost double the homicide rate, almost double the firearms rate. or actually even higher firearms rate. And then you're looking at Texas. Texas is about the same, 4.6 versus 5. And then you're looking at those 7.9 versus 12.1 on firearm death rate. Homicide rate's about the same. Firearm is a little bit, quite a bit higher, about 50% higher in Texas. So I think it's really important to actually look at, well, what is the data behind these anecdotal claims? Because I, for one, I obviously, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, whatever they're comfortable with. However, I can say that I've been around everywhere in LA, because when you move to California from somewhere else, you look at and see everything because you don't want to miss out. And there definitely is a big homeless problem in the state of California overall. However, I have not come across needles, which both Shapiro and Graham said that was a daily to at least weekly occurrence. And I just find that basically impossible to believe. So I'd like to see some actual evidence of these claims, because literally every time I've heard it, it's not from someone that lives anywhere near an area where those things would even be around, assuming that they were. And I think a really good example is, if you want to have a better idea of, what homelessness looks like in Los Angeles and in the Bay Area and across the United States, check out the YouTube channel Invisible People. I have a link for them down in the bio, in the description for this. And they do a really great job of documenting what the lives of unhoused people in the United States actually is like. And it's nowhere near as sensationalized as you would think from these people. Now, I also want to keep in mind that when we're talking about homelessness, yes, it's a extremely big problem, no question. And it is definitely a problem. It's a big problem in California. That being said, what is the cause, right, is what we have to look at. And I know Graham talked about how this was a huge problem, that he hadn't seen that homelessness had gotten better in the time that he had been in California, and that was something that he, felt was a real problem when it came to his day-to-day, what he saw day-to-day on the streets. And what I want to say is that for those of you who, a few of you probably don't know, what Graham does is he is a real estate agent and broker. He also is a really good YouTuber. And so essentially he's a professional real estate investor. That's his job. He's part of the problem. Like, you can't be investing in high-end real estate. And if you want to check him out on Netflix, he's in a show called Selling Sunset. Like, we're not talking about, selling affordable housing in lower-end areas. We're talking about speculating on real estate, which good for him, both in 2008 and since then, but that was where he got his start. And when people buy up real estate and they hold it long-term in a desirable area, it will drive prices up. When housing prices get driven up, which they are insanely high in the state of California, that causes scarcity because people can't afford it. When people can't afford it, they're homeless. That's the way this works. So the issue is that housing prices continue to increase faster in the state of California pretty much than anywhere else in the United States because of the high demand, because it's pretty awesome here, to be honest. But not only that, even if we weren't talking about just the state of California, housing prices in the United States have increased faster than real wages for the last 40 years. So if you really do have a problem with, the amount of unhoused people in the state of California and saying that, well, nothing's being done about it, but then you leave because you don't want to help pay into the system where you've benefited through real estate speculation, it's a little bit of an issue. Don't get me wrong. Graham seems like a great guy, and it's the best decision for him to move to Nevada. My point is, if we're going to actually have an honest conversation about what the problem is, it's a pretty easy answer. And thankfully, there are examples of like Prop 15, which, like I was saying, it's looking at repealing Prop 13, which Prop 13 is a pretty regressive part of the California law, where people that are holding real estate, whenever they buy it, they pay based on they pay taxes based off of the purchase value adjusted for inflation each year. However, the problem is that inflation usually is lower. The growth of inflation is usually lower than the growth of California housing prices. This means that people that have been holding real estate long term end up paying less in property taxes than new competitors to the market. This favors people that are holding big pieces of real estate long term, i.e., mostly big investors and investment firms, not the average person. And what it does, it drives up housing prices. Now, so if we really, and on top of that, then when you look at most of SoCal has a very unregulated rental market, where landlords are essentially able to evict people with little or no notice. And I've got a good article linking that down below showing exactly what I'm talking about. But it's a real problem. I know plenty of people in the state of California, especially up near north of LA, that that have been evicted for basically no reason, and they aren't required to show a reason in a lot of areas in Southern California. Fortunately, I'm in a rent-controlled apartment, so I'm okay, but that doesn't mean that everyone else is, and that's something to keep in mind. Also, when we're trying to understand this, what are the fixes? Because Graham said, well, nothing has been fixed. So the question is, well, what are the fixes? And the answer is that we need higher wages, right? That are addressing the living standards that the average person should, be able to expect living in the richest first world country. We need more regulation on the rental market, i.e., we need, more rent control standard across the state. We need more public housing. The government in California definitely needs to get, on the ball and invest more in public housing, because there are, and I'll definitely do a video on this as well, because there are plenty of studies that actually support that it will save the community, like a society or government or community, more to actually house people than it is to leave them outside and unhoused. And I think everyone can agree that even if it costed more, even if that weren't true, we would still probably want to fix that because it's pretty inhumane. And then on top of that, investors increase the cost of living in an area. And don't get me wrong, I understand that's the system that we live in. I'm not faulting, Graham or anyone else who does that. However, you do need to keep in mind that if you're gonna have a problem with the effects of it, you need to look at what the cause is and how you're contributing to it. And that's my personal opinion. And then we also need to remember that, gentrification is a real problem when you have, especially investors in the state of California, coming in, buying in areas that are historically lower income and often minority heavy areas. They come in, they basically have these condos, houses, whatever the housing situation they're trying to sell is, and they're targeting it towards, young people with a lot of money or at least a good paying job, and it pushes people out because it raises rents in that area. And I'll definitely do a video on that as well, because that's a much more complicated topic than I can address in a, short part of this one. And like I said, Prop 15 should help with some of the investors, but it's not enough. Because the problem you have is, and this is, of course, completely anecdotal, but in the state of California, if you go to buy a house, right? If a house comes on the market, especially in the Los Angeles area, and even more so in the West Los Angeles area, when a house goes on the market, oftentimes you have investment firms or just, informal groups of investors waiting to make cash offers on homes at higher than what their listing price is. And when you think about this from the standpoint of a normal person that's trying to save up for a 20% down payment on a 30-year mortgage, it's a real problem. And that's why we have so many empty houses, yet unhoused people in California and in the United States overall. So Graham definitely has a point. The problem hasn't been fixed. It has gotten worse. There's no question there. The issue is, okay, well, let's look at how do we fix it? What's the path forward? Not just, well, it stinks. And that's my opinion. That being said, I wish Graham the best, and I know he'll enjoy being in LA or in Las Vegas rather, with Jeremy and Andre Jig. So I'm sure that'll be great. The next one is fleeing to red states. So this is a really common, and this is the fourth myth about the California exodus, is fleeing to red states. So this is a really common myth that people flee big, like blue states and, do that to go to red states. And I think it's really important to understand the actual statistics behind this claim, so that we don't get tricked by it, because it's more complicated than just saying that. So as an example, you'll see over here that when we're looking at state to state migration, right? So where people move from and where people move to. From 2010 to 2015, California had the most people leave, right? However, California has by far the most people in the United States. So saying that more people left this state, therefore everyone is fleeing, isn't enough. It's not a high enough mark to say that this is statistically significant, comparatively speaking, to other states. Not only that, but you have the classic one of "Don't California my Texas," which is, the common slogan that I've seen from people that are in Texas, where they don't want people from California moving there and turning it blue. And for people that are outside of the United States, blue in the United States is representative of the Democratic Party, and red is representative of the Republican Party. So just so there's no confusion there. The states aren't literally those colors. And so here's the thing to keep in mind. The states right behind California were Texas, New York, and Florida. And if you know about American politics, you know that, well, that isn't just blue states. That's the two biggest blue and the two biggest red. I wonder what the coincidence there is that the states with the highest populations also have the highest number of people leaving. It's not really hard to figure out. Now, also, when you're looking over here on the other side of the screen, as I'm walking you through this graph, so this is in, thousands of movers, right? And we're looking at, okay, so we have New York, Georgia, and Texas mostly moving to Florida, right? We have California. Oh, there we are. California, look at that. The exodus, they're all moving to Texas. But then when we come down here and we have the same thing with Texas, look at this. The most common place for people from Texas to move to is California. It couldn't be funnier to me, because it's just such a silly statement. Then on top of that, when we keep in mind that California, this is how insane California's population is. So we're understanding California has almost 40 million people in it, right? The United States has about 325 million, I think. So we're talking about a state in a 50-state country with over 10% of the population. It's huge. There's a ton of people here. And what this map is showing is that not just that, which I'm originally from North Carolina. So as an example, the county I live in right now has more people than the state that I grew up in. It has more people than the state I was born in, the state I grew up in, and the state I lived before coming here. So it's important to keep in mind that when we're looking at these statistics, that we're talking about, per capita or percentages, not just whole numbers, because it's not really going to give a whole lot of a perspective, that's going to really help us. At least not in my opinion. I don't see that that's a very helpful thing to talk about. It'd be like saying the same with, it'd be like comparing the total number of murders in China versus the United States. Yeah, China probably has more murders than the United States. They have 13 times the population. No surprise there. It doesn't mean it's a murder capital. Now, so then what this comes down to is, okay, and I think you guys have a good idea of what I think about this, but then it comes down to, is it real, right? Is the California exodus real? And obviously, no, it's not, right? when we're looking at it ironically, and this is not an exaggeration. Ironically, not only is it not true that people are not moving from California in droves. California has the lowest per capita movement rate meaning moving from one state to another. They have the per capita lowest movement rate in the US. So ironically, California is actually the least likely state for a resident to move from in the United States. Wouldn't have thought that from all the stuff you've been seeing, would you? But that's why it's important to understand statistics and understand looking at how do we measure, claims? How do we measure what's going on in society? Now, in fairness, Texas is a pretty great state too, because Texas is number 2 on the state where people are least likely to move from. So guess what? They're both great states. It's not a battle between the two like people are making it. And that's my point here, is I'm trying to dispel this myth because I get really tired of seeing it, especially whenever you see someone who's a millionaire investor who is talking about how the taxes are too high for them, despite, not being necessarily a positive influence in that area. Now, some caveats to this. California does have a higher net migration than other states, right? As we said, higher raw totals. However, when we're looking at the percentages, on average, that's about a 1.5% movement rate. So when we're looking at it, it's not that big of a deal. It's pretty small. Then, not only that, California also we have the highest rate of people moving here from outside the country. So it actually ends up offsetting the amount of movement. When you hear people talk about that's redundant. When you hear people talk about those fleeing California and that they've lost this many people, the problem is that when they're looking at those numbers, the numbers that they're talking about, and specifically I'm talking about the ones where people are saying that, there has been like 900,000 people leave California in the last decade. Okay. That doesn't, mean anything if we're not also looking at, well, what is the change in people over that amount of time in the state? Because when we do look at that, this is the chart. This is the chart for California's population. And I'll zoom in on that a little bit more for you because I'm sure it's probably small. This is the chart for California's population. Let me know where the dip is. It's not there because it's not happening. Yes, people move from high cost of living areas to lower cost of living areas. That is what happens when housing prices push people out. That is a serious problem. However, suggesting that everyone's running away from California, it's just not true. And we need to, be able to look at these claims and call them out when it happens. And the takeaway for this, at least from my perspective, is that we need to crack down on investors, controlling housing, both in the state of California and elsewhere, because that's something that shouldn't be happening in the United States. It's a travesty, and yeah, that should not be happening. We need, especially in the state of California, but only because we have more people everywhere, we need to do more investing into public housing because we need to do something about unhoused people. It's pathetic that in the United States we have so many people that are unhoused when we're the richest nation in the world. That's pathetic, and that's a failure, in my opinion. And then we also need to look at statistics. We need to have a basic grasp on them. Not everyone needs to go to school for statistics, but we need to have a basic grasp on statistics so that we don't fall for this type of propaganda. And that's why I'm definitely, that's why I cover that on this channel. That's the goal, is to make sure that we don't fall for this type of stuff in the future and that we have the critical thinking and the basic math skills to understand what claims are being made and how to prove or disprove those claims. Okay, cool. So that is the beginning. That is the first topic. And let's get on to the chat and see what's going on. Okay, cool. Yeah, what's up, Fit Rush? Nice to see you here. Appreciate you coming by. Same with you, Nikki. Thank you both. And in a moment, we will get started on the next topic. As I said at the beginning, if anyone has any questions, comments, whatever, I'm going through set topics. Once I go through them, in between, I will get back to the chat and I will answer any questions / respond. So, if I don't answer you immediately, just be patient. That way I'm able to get this stuff out a lot more cohesive and stay on track. Awesome. Okay, and then let's line up what we have here. Awesome. Okay, cool. So now what we're going to look at is what we're going to be looking at the claim we've been seeing lately, mostly by Trump and others, on welfare states and whether those exist, and if so, how would we measure that and question those claims. So one moment. Awesome. Okay, so okay, and our next topic is going to be on welfare states, red or blue. So what we want to look at is in the United States, there's been a really pervasive claim lately in the, especially in 2020 with everything that's been going on economically, stimulus, and different federal government programs, and whether or not they're going to be able to help out different states for whatever economic issues that they're facing. And we keep hearing, especially Trump and others though, but talk about mismanaged blue states. And blue, for anyone that's not familiar with the United States, that may be international watching, blue states generally is Democratic states, and red is Republican. So that's the terminology I'm going to be using for the rest of this video. So he's talking about mismanaged blue states and how they need to be bailed out, right? So it's basically what has caused this is you have Nancy Pelosi and other Nancy Pelosi, Cuomo, so California, New York, you have different blue states that are asking for more federal aid from the government, from the federal government, to help them deal with the coronavirus pandemic and with, what's been going on for the last several months. And to combat that, we keep hearing this like tired line about how, oh, well, blue states always spend their money and they're needing to be bailed out, and we shouldn't be bailing them out because they need to learn how to, spend their money wisely. What I want to do is let's look at the data. Let's see what, the reality is when we actually look at the analytics. So for perspective, and this is just for perspective on just COVID relief, right? The COVID relief that states got from the federal government, right? So New York, which is a blue state, received about $24,000 per positive COVID test, right? Seems like a pretty good amount, right? Probably like just the average person. Now, when we put this in perspective, Alaska, which is a pretty deep red state, received $3.3 million per positive case. Puts it in perspective. Now, we understand that these have very different population within each state. So, yeah, per capita, of course, it's going to be, roughly, it's going to be unequal if the numbers are anywhere close to the same. That's why it's kind of important to understand what we're talking about when people are making a claim about a state needing to be, quote unquote, bailed out. When we're not comparing apples to apples, we're comparing Alaska's to New York's. So let's look at California, Texas, Florida, and some other red states. And let's just see, Wallet Hub did a really good job of putting together a list of red and blue states and how they rank in terms of federal dependency. So I want to look at that, and I'm going to be leaning on that for this video. So now that I'm sharing my screen with you, we can see over here we have the Wallet Hub study, and what they looked at is they're looking at what are the most federally dependent states. This is based on 2020 data, and we're looking at which states take in the most from the federal government compared to what they give to the federal government. So if you don't know, states take in taxes, they then pay taxes to the federal government, and then they get money back from the federal government when necessary. And that's the ebb and flow of how the federal and state governments work together in the United States to help out states when they need it, and to, have a state help out the other ones when they're in a better position. And that's generally how the system works. So let's look on here as an example. When we're looking, the most federally dependent state is New Mexico. And I have on the other side the electoral map from 2016, just showing, then this is actually on average from 2000 to 2016. So it'll depend on the specific election, but this is a good composite over the last 20 years to give you an idea. And what we're looking at is, okay, well, let's see, is there some type of a trend here, right? California, it's actually top 10 of least federally dependent. Texas, it's not quite that good, but it's like 15, right? 16, I believe, if I'm doing that math right in my head. New York, it's worse than Texas when it comes to federal dependency, at least this year, which makes sense. They got hit pretty hard, comparatively speaking. And then we're looking at the most federally dependent. We're looking at states like Montana, Wyoming, New Mexico, Arizona, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Kentucky, West Virginia. You get the idea. Now, we also have states that are traditionally red that are not very federally dependent. As an example, Kansas, right? Utah, they aren't. Iowa, however, their economies are very different, and that's something that we're going to look at going forward. Let's look, and then on top of that, let's look historically. Okay, well, what does this mean, right? Does this mean anything? And it does. Essentially, the issue you have is that, first of all, red states are on average more dependent on the federal government than blue states. Ironically, despite all the rhetoric that you hear, they are. They take in more money from the federal government than do blue states. Why? Which is the main question we really want to understand. And it's pretty obvious. The answer is that those states don't make as much money. On average, the people within them, the cost of living tends to be lower in red states. So you end up being able to stretch your dollar further within red states, and people make less money. If people make less money, and on top of that, in red states, you tend to have lower taxes, meaning lower percentage taxes, so lower tax rates. If you're taxing less on lower income, you have less revenue. If you have less tax revenue, you will need more money from somewhere else to cover the expenses that are necessary in that state. It's not complicated. And it's not controversial. It shouldn't be. It's not a competition between red or blue states. The point is, why? What is happening? And just looking at these type of claims and calling them for what they are, right? It's not complicated. Now, this is a really cool study from Georgetown that I wanted to show, and it's talking about the growing, and all of this stuff is linked below. It's talking about the growing divide between red and blue states, and it's pretty alarming and something that we want to keep in mind when we're looking at, okay, well, why would someone live in a state that's higher taxes, like, California? Why would someone choose that? What's the reason? Why would I choose that over a state where I could pay less in taxes? It should be a no-brainer that I want to pay less in taxes, right? The problem when you look at is that in these states, we can see over time since, 2000, which is how far back this graph goes, since the recession, basically, we've seen that Democratic-led states tend to have higher median household incomes. And not only that, it's growing further and further apart over time, which is only going to further exacerbate this problem of lack of federal funding in those states, because the higher people make in a higher tax state, the more tax revenue that state is going to have. When we're looking at then poverty rates, we can see poverty rates are lower in blue states. Why do we think that might be? Well, if we have higher taxes and we're able to fund better social programs, better education, then we're going to have less, and also higher minimum wages. That's important because this is comparing to the federal poverty line. That's a pretty big deal, right? If you're looking at, so what it comes down to is, what outcomes do you want? When you're paying taxes in a state, you're essentially paying for how the government, or at least how able the government is to spend money on necessary, what they deem necessary programs. And those programs, if they are effective, should help the average person's outcome, which, as we can see, again, uninsured rate, which that depends on, your perspective on that. But then when we're looking at, high school diplomas, it's roughly about the same. Generally speaking, the United States has done a pretty good job when it comes to that. Overall, bachelor's degrees, this shouldn't really be too complicated. I mean, when you're looking at it as an example, the bluest states, you're talking about California and New York, and both of those, you have a lot of high-paying college required jobs, so they're going to have higher rates of people with bachelor's degrees. It's not really a complicated thing to understand. And then we're even looking at like employment rate. It's about the same. Employment rate is not, which actually helps with the whole combating the whole argument about raising the minimum wage or raising or lowering taxes across state lines changes or affects unemployment rate a lot. It doesn't. I did a video on that as well earlier. I'm talking about minimum wage myths, so definitely check that out if you're interested. But as we can see, and then GDP per capita, it's going to be pretty high just because of the higher wage jobs that you have in Democratic-led states. And then this is just a composite breakdown of that. But the point is that this bickering that is what inevitably comes from the rhetoric that is being used about mismanaged blue states or mismanaged red states, it's stupid, right? The problem you have is that if we aren't putting enough money back into the public sector in order to make things better, then we have less public investment in those areas, which makes those areas fall behind, which is what you're seeing with red states over the last 20 years, specifically, according to this study. It's been going on longer than that, but at minimum, the last 20 years. Then comes, okay, well, if someone really wants the answer is, are states mooching? No, that is stupid. Nobody, there is no such thing as a welfare state. And I know people that, may be listening that were happy. We're like, oh yeah, he's putting it to the red one. No, there's no such thing as a welfare state. There's no such thing as a mooching state. Okay. A welfare state or a mooching state is one that is just not doing a good job of supporting their citizens effectively, right? Our system in the United States is set up so that the federal government can reallocate funds to areas that need help. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Just like there's nothing wrong with helping people that are in more, individual people that are in more need within a society, because it helps the society as a whole grow and become better and have better outcomes overall. We need to do the same thing, and we need to make sure that our government is making our lives better so that we can have those outcomes. And if they aren't, then we need to do something about that, right? And we need to have some sort of a referendum, whether that's voting or picketing or what we need to do in order to fix that problem. Overall, the takeaway is that this is just a dumb talking point, and all it really serves to do is divide working class people. We shouldn't be arguing over whether or not, red states or blue states are better, because that isn't the reason you choose to live a place. Most people choose based on either their economic means to be able to move or their economic incentive to move, i.e. how much money they're able to make in a job because there's a job that they want to work in another state versus where they're at. Red and blue doesn't really decide where people live. Most of us tend to live in the same state we were born in our entire lives, which is another thing entirely. But What really matters is that we need to push for our local and state governments to invest in our community so that we get more from our taxes. And we need to remember that this is always a give and take, right? If we produce less tax revenue in a state, then we will have less public funds, right? And demonizing states based on a political leaning without trying to solve the issue is just counterproductive and only serves to hurt the average working class person. Now let's get back to the chat and see what's going on. Awesome. Okay, cool. I'm going to get a sip of something and then we will get on to the next topic. And as I've said previously in this, if you have any questions or comments throughout the stream, be sure to put those in the chat and I will get to those in between topics. So if it takes me a minute, please just be patient. No worries. And I will get to your any questions or comments in between each topic. Thank you. What's up, Dang? 45 lies. You're going to like the next topic that I go over because I'm going to be talking about Trump's economy and comparing it to his predecessor and just looking at how accurate are his claims about having such a great economy when that's his main selling point. So I think you'll like that a lot. And good username. I agree. 45 lies. Kick it with Dang. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Yeah, it should be good. So far, it's definitely been good. It's definitely been good. And Richard, honestly, I'd rather have mezcal, but that would be nice right now for sure. There will definitely be drinking of mezcal and other alcoholic beverages tomorrow night. That is for sure, regardless of the outcome. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate it. Okay, and with that, I'm going to get on to the next topic. Okay, cool. Okay, so the next topic we're going to be covering is the truth behind Trump's economy. So we know that Trump has consistently claimed, and we've heard people, that support him as well, consistently claim that, the economy is amazing, right? That Trump built an amazing economy. And I'm going to be as fair as possible, right? And when I say that, I mean, I'm going to give him every benefit of the doubt, right? In these claims. I'm only going to be talking about the economy pre-pandemic, right? So I'm not even going to talk about the economy since then. I'm just going to say, for the sake of argument, let's assume that none of that is his responsibility, right? Which nobody did for his predecessor when it came to the recession that he inherited. However, let's look at it that way and let's understand this claim, right? So the main source I'm going to be looking at on top of that, because I do think it's really important to look specifically at sources that disagree with you, right? Or that have every reason to disagree with you, i.e., if I want to measure the validity of a claim, then I'm going to want to see, okay, are there studies that have every reason to disagree with me? And am I still going to be able to look at that and see that it supports, my perspective? And so I'm going to be looking at the Cato Institute. All these links are going to be in the description box below. I'm going to be looking at the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian / conservative leaning, think tank essentially. But they have some good economic analysis stuff. So it's pretty accurate, generally speaking, their opinion, give or take. So what we're going to look at first of all is GDP. So when we're looking, GDP is something that is in, basically you're looking at, okay, how much is an economy producing, right? What's its gross domestic product? So how productive is it, right? And what we want to see is, okay, we see, this is of course the recession, right? So GDP contracted quite a bit. And then we're looking at, okay, over time, this is from here to here, right? Is going to be Obama's presidency. And then from here on is going to be Trump's presidency. And we want to look, okay, what is the difference in GDP growth, right? And so it's very important to understand that when Trump was campaigning, that he was consistently talking about Obama having, GDP growth that was way too low, which U.S. GDP growth has been low for the past about 30 years. It's been about 2 to 3%, right? And which in comparison, right, like China has been growing at about 6 to 8% a year GDP. Even this year, even with COVID, China grew 4% in GDP this year. So really opens up perspective. Under Obama, when we're looking at, say, first 3 years versus first 3 years, Obama saw GDP growth about 2.4% a year. Trump has seen it at about 2.5% a year. It's about the same, right? Doesn't really matter. And we can also look at the way those are calculated because based on the way that spending works with the government, there are people that would suggest that adjusted, they are basically exactly the same, but let's just call 2.4, 2.5, potato. It's about the same, right? Now, the other thing to keep in mind is this extremely small benefit, right? Or this extremely small accelerant of the economy came with a very high increase in the deficit. The highest increase, Obama definitely increased the deficit a lot. However, that was during a recession. The highest increase in the deficit in a non-recession ever under Trump, right? The reason, now there are people that will argue that doesn't matter. I am actually one of them. However, if you're a deficit hawk, you have to be consistent and be, calling it out when it happens under both people. And there are some that do. Peter Schiff, who I basically disagree with on everything. Peter Schiff is one person that's actually pretty consistent about this. So props to him on that at least. But basically the issue you had is that Trump, of course, made the 2017 tax cuts. And when we're looking at the 2017 tax cuts, we want to see is what did those do, right? Because the problem you had was that they cut government funding, right, at the same time as spending went up still. So that increased the deficit, right? Now, also when we're looking at who those tax cuts benefited, they didn't really benefit the average person very much. They mostly benefited people making over $200,000 per year, not people that are average, right? Important to remember. Now, when we're looking at job growth, right? Because that's another thing that Trump definitely hammered Obama with, was that, you aren't growing jobs fast enough. We need to be able to grow them faster. I'm going to bring all the jobs back, right? The problem is it just doesn't happen. Job growth slipped from depending on the numbers you're looking at. This is from the Joint Economic Committee in the Senate. Depending on numbers, it's about 227 or 217 under Obama 1,000 per month job growth, and it's about 191 to 189 per month under Trump. So we're looking at about 30 to 40,000 less job growth per month under Trump. Now, it's still good. There's nothing that's not bad. It's just there's just no reason to lie about it. It's good. It's just it didn't improve that much under Obama. It didn't improve that much from when it was under Obama. And that's the thing to keep in mind here, because that was the claim that was made and it's still being made. Now, also, when we're looking at Obama's last 3 years, so I'm not comparing Obama's first 3 years, which would be unfair to compare from the bottom of a recession to normal economic growth. I'm comparing his last 3 years versus Trump's first 3 years. So they run right into each other and they contain the tax cuts from 2017. Obama saw 8.1 million jobs, new jobs come, and Trump's only seen 6.55. Remember, this is pre-pandemic. Something to keep in mind. So when we're talking about the jobs come back, I don't really know about that. Doesn't seem like it to me. Now, when we're looking at unemployment rate, because unemployment is something that people talk about constantly. You hear about record low unemployment for, African Americans or Latinos, and this, of course, pre-pandemic, because it is much higher than this now. But when we're looking, let's say, okay, well, what is the cause, right? Because when a politician or anyone really makes a claim, we need to not necessarily worry about, well, is the thing that they're saying true, but we need to understand why is it true, especially when it has to do with public policy. We need to be questioning, okay, what specific policies produce the desired outcomes? And can that be attributed to a specific person, movement, whatever? And when we're looking, we can see that we're following the slope of this line, right? We can see that unemployment rates have dropped pretty steadily since 2010. There's not really a change. It's actually leveled off a little bit under Trump, but I mean, there's not a whole lot more you can ask on this, in my opinion. This is pretty good within our current system. This is pretty good, right? Again, nothing to be ashamed of. And then if you want to look as here's another example of the same thing with a little bit more of a detailed breakdown. And as you can see, again, it's about the same, right? The difference is that Obama actually, in his second term, right? So again, his last 3 versus Trump's first 3 years, unemployment dropped from 6.2 to 4.9% under Obama's second term, right? Under Trump, it dropped from 4.4 to 3.7. That's half as steep of a drop. It just hasn't. So the main thing to keep there in mind is whenever people talk about like, oh, the 2017 tax cuts are going to pay for themselves because they're going to, encourage companies to hire more people. They didn't. They cut corporate taxes by about 40%, right? Total corporate tax revenue in the United States by about 40% and increased jobs by 0.7%. That's a terrible trade. That's a terrible trade for the average working class person, that's for sure. The only people that are benefiting from that are the people that own the businesses, not the average person. And that's a pretty important thing to keep in mind. Now, another really key thing to keep in mind is, okay, well, it's still good, and it is, that it's still good though that, unemployment rate is low, and unemployment rate is, historically low for, Latinos, African Americans, this group, that group. The other problem you have is that what type of jobs, and that matters because when you're looking at how unemployment rate is calculated, you have to ask, what does it mean to be, a person that's employed? And when we're looking, the problem is that real wages dropped under Trump. So yes, jobs got added, not good ones. Jobs that were lower paying got added. As you can see, it was already dropping under Obama. No question. However, just not. It wasn't. And then on top of that, what you see is the percent change, right? And you see, okay, well, there was a big move there, right? Right here, from 2018 through the end to beginning of 2019. The problem is that is based off of the historically low federal interest rates, right? Where we've been hovering close to, basically between 2 and 0% every year during Trump's administration. And that, influences people to, hire, but it hurts people that are saving money. So the question is, okay, well, is the juice worth the squeeze there? Not really. And now let's keep in mind that whether it was Obama or Trump, we still haven't approached what real wages were 10 years ago. Not to even mention that we're nowhere close to what wages were even several decades ago. So it's not really making the economy great. It's basically been as good as it was under Obama, and at times worse, which is fair That's not, I don't expect a president to change an entire economy. That's not what presidents do, right? But we need to be honest about what has happened and what policies affected that. Also, when we're looking at real median household income, it's been about the same. It's actually leveled off a bit since coming into Trump. So, okay, cool. It's still going up. Still about the same, though, at the same rate. No new trend. Nothing really has changed, which is the main takeaway from it. Next part is the stock market. This is another thing that Trump has talked about constantly. And first of all, the stock market is not the economy. I did a video on this as well. Check it out. But the stock market, when people talk about the stock market's up, so that means the economy is good, this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what the stock market measures. The stock market measures investor sentiment. It does not measure how the economy is doing overall for the average person. I.e., if the stock market's up, yes, those who own stocks, i.e., about half of Americans, are doing better. However, the other half are not benefiting from it. So it's not a measure of the economy. You can have half the members of the United States doing much poorer. The stock market's still doing good, especially when you have very low interest rates. So money's very cheap to borrow. And you have tax cuts that allow companies to then roll more revenue back into stock buybacks or into other investments. Yeah, it can look good. That doesn't mean anything for the economy. It's not the same thing. However, let's assume his premise. Let's assume that the stock market is a good indication of the economy doing well. Well, the reality is that we're looking at, 2013. So we're talking, or even before that, but when we're looking at the last 3 years of Obama, it's basically the same. The only difference is we've had big spike, big crash, big spike, big crash. It's just been a little bit more jagged. We had the two right here with Obama, nowhere near as deep, obviously, but that's not necessarily, Trump or Obama's responsibility. But the point is that overall, they've grown about the same. And on top of that, we keep in mind that allowing businesses to keep more money through the 2017 tax cuts, most of the big S&P 500 businesses use that money to then buy their own shares of stock, i.e. elevate their own stock prices, which just pushes their stock up because oftentimes CEOs and other executives are compensated through stock options. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything. It's fake growth. It's just not. So we're talking about, the reality is the stock market is not going to go, it's not going to depart that much from the GDP. So yeah, you would expect it to not grow very fast because we've had a very low growth environment for the last several decades in the United States. So what's the takeaway? Well, overall, Trump has not done much to improve the economy that he inherited from Obama. Like I said, that's not necessarily a knock on him because the economy was already looking good from the metrics that, we've been talking about in this video. And keep in mind, I'm comparing to what they were when Obama inherited them as well, which was a complete disaster during the financial crisis. Not saying that it's good because there are a lot of issues with America's economy and with how the average person, benefits or even, oftentimes doesn't benefit from it. But the point is that it's important to look at the numbers and to pressure test the lofty claims that Trump and others tend to make about the economy. And also we need to keep in mind in the back of our head that these ridiculously low interest rate environments have really helped inflate the economy with really cheap debt. And that's a big part of the reason that I know you probably heard about the Fed and Jerome Powell's money printer go burr. Them printing money and having money at historically cheap rates to loan, that pushes the economy up, i.e. the stock market up. So we need to keep in mind what pushes the market up. It's not presidential policies, generally speaking. The Fed runs the U.S. economy more than any other entity. So keep that in mind when you're listening to rhetoric from any presidential candidate, because policy always trumps rhetoric. And that's the end of that topic. Let's get to the chat, see what's going on, and then we will talk about the Gini coefficient and measuring wealth inequality. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so let's see. 45 Lies says, Trump's coal, oil, and gas are the horse and buggy before the automobile. Dying. I 100% agree with you. I think I did some videos on that a couple weeks ago that definitely should check out, talking about Exxon New and oil propaganda, talking about BP and propagating the idea of the carbon footprint to scapegoat working class people, and then also Trump, scapegoating China and India and other countries, for getting out of the Paris Climate Accord. I 100% agree. And we need to invest in areas that actually help our future and don't and not prioritize profits. I mean, in my opinion, I think that even if we are to continue having oil and coal, the U.S. government pours so much money into petroleum businesses, U.S.-based petroleum businesses, because they are not competitive on a world market, that we should honestly be nationalizing them and be running them nonprofit. And then that way there's less of a lobbying economic incentive to favor them over renewable resources, since long-term, we need to invest more in those. Kick it with Dang. Thank you for the comment. And Kick it with Dang. I have also noticed a bunch of Republicans threatening to leave California, LOL. Yeah, exactly. And they never do. And you know why? Because it was 70 degrees today and it's November 2nd. It's amazing here. And now there are plenty of problems, no question. But if you're capable of affording to live in California, you don't leave. It's amazing. The amount, and I'll have to share more of that on this channel. Follow my Instagram if you want to see, but I do a lot of outdoor stuff, a lot of hiking, going to the beach, Yosemite, Death Valley. It's amazing how beautiful California is. They always threaten it. They never do. Dennis Prager, who's one of the most egregious. That guy lives in Santa Clarita and he lived in Brooklyn, New York, and Santa Clarita his entire life. And all he does is talk about how bad liberal policies are. My dude, leave then. I've lived in rural Georgia. You can too. You won't though. Because there's reasons. And then Kick it with Dang. How do you find the most unbiased resources for data? So I'm going to share my screen and show you the best. So I read a ton, and I'm a nerd. That's first of all. So I'm very cognizant of a lot of classic tropes. So that helps. But let's say, as an example, if I'm wanting to look for something, let's say I wanted to research U.S. GDP and poverty rates. The first thing is, let's say I wanted to look at that and look at so first of all, when you look at Economic Policy Institute, so a lot of it has to do with just general knowledge. So the Economic Policy Institute is, generally speaking, a libertarian / conservative leaning institute. Same thing with FEE, which is the Financial and Economic Institute or something like that, or the Foundation of Economic, I don't remember, but anyway, you get the idea. That helps, but the main thing I would look at is I look at data so if I'm wanting to look and compare, say, the U.S. versus other countries, then I would look at one that has every incentive to not be biased towards the U.S. So I would look at, say, the World Bank. And the World Bank is definitely biased towards bigger, more economically viable countries, for sure, but it depends on the specific data, and there's not a perfect way of doing it. The main way that I would say is, let's say you want to look at something, let's go with something spicy. So systemic racism, right? And you wanted to see, we see immediately, I don't like, none of these look Ben and Jerry's, that they're doing some pretty good SEO. But generally speaking, I would look for stuff like this, where you're talking about it's an educational institution, because it's not, they don't have an incentive to lie. The other one that I would do is I would suggest going on Google Scholar. So this is like a pretty dope thing from back in the day. Just, this is the way I find it every time. You just go to Google Scholar and you can look for articles or case law. And then what you can look for, and what's cool about this is this will filter out anyone that's like SEO, hacking to try and get their stuff to the top. So i.e. people that are paying for, search essentially. And what it does is it shows you only peer-reviewed stuff. So you would look, as an example, like, you have all these different examples. You have like books, where you can find actual Google books and cite the actual pages, which is really helpful. And oftentimes, there's limitations to that. Same thing when you're looking at, right here from academia.edu, you find a lot of good papers with helpful abstracts. So things like that. But as far as like news, I tend to go for, international, because international organizations as opposed to U.S. private organizations, because I think one of the biggest problems when people complain about sensationalism in the media is that we have to keep in mind that for-profit media companies have every incentive to be sensational, because it's what drives clicks and makes them money. So that's why I tend to prefer things like the BBC, Al Jazeera, different media organizations that are most of the time, generally publicly funded and have every reason to not be biased towards, what I'm questioning. So yeah, it's a good question. And the other thing I'd say is, like, if someone's not backing up what they're saying with evidence, like, don't get me wrong, I don't expect everyone to put links and stuff constantly in their videos like I do, because it's a lot of work. But if someone's making a claim, we need to remember the classic Hitch's razor from Christopher Hitchens is, that which is stated without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. If you're going to make a claim, you need to have evidence, and don't rely on anecdotal claims. Anecdotal claims are good for giving an emotional touch on a story, but if there isn't something, fundamental, data to back it up, or, it's not objectively, there's not some objective way to measure the validity of the statement, then I generally stay away from those topics. And yeah, always check in the links below, because I have a ton of different resources that I find really helpful, and read as much as you can. I'll definitely do a Q&A at some point talking about different books, and I'll do some reviews of different books. But yeah, that was long-winded, sorry. And then Kick It with Dang, agreed. Born and raised, and I can't imagine myself living anywhere else. Yeah, bro. I moved here so my dad was in the Marine Corps, so I lived in Georgia, North Carolina. I worked in Alabama for a little while, and I moved out here after graduating college, and I don't know why you'd live anywhere else other than cost of living. If you have the old saying, the old like joke saying, and sorry if anyone's from Missouri, but it could be any state, but the old joke saying is like, nobody lives in Missouri by choice. Generally speaking, economic factors determine where you're able to live. And fortunately enough, I'm able to live here. So, okay, with that, thank you, Dang. I'm going to get on to the next topic. Let me get that set up. Awesome. Okay, cool. Okay, so the next topic we're going to be talking about is the Gini Coefficient. So, first of all, what it is, it's a way of measuring wealth inequality across a population. So I'm going to share my screen with you and show you what's going on here. But basically, this is a Lorenz curve. So if we're looking, this is measuring the number of people, right, within an economy by percent, right? And this is looking at the income, right, total income across that economy in percentages. So what we'd be looking at is, say, as an example, that, and then let's say here's what a line of absolute equality would be. So in this example, at 0% of the population would account for 0% of the cumulative share of income if it were at this point on the line. If it were about here, it would be about 50% of the people make up about 50% of the cumulative income. and all the way up to 100%. And this is what's known as a line, either the 45-degree line, or it's known as the line of perfect equality, right? And a Lorenz curve is essentially, it's in the least complicated way that I can explain it to you. Basically, a Lorenz curve is looking at, it's a function looking at how economic distribution occurs across a population. So, they'll have different functions depending on the society, but the closer this Lorenz curve is to the 45-degree line, the closer it is to being equal, according to the Gini coefficient. And then what the Gini coefficient actually is when you take the area, so the distance, the space between the Lorenz curve and the line of equality, right? And you divide it by the total area under the line of line of equality. So it's A divided by A plus B in parentheses. And essentially, 1 would be perfectly unequal, because that would mean that it would be equal to the line of equality, because it would be the entire area. And then 0 would be perfectly equal. So you want it to be lower, generally speaking. Now, when we're looking at, let's say, you're a proponent of, free market, laissez-faire capitalism, right? And which most economies are mixed economies. That does not exist in the world currently, or ever really. But let's say you were, right? This economic inequality, like the reason measuring it matters is because it should still be a concern, because it lessens the ability of someone to succeed based on merit, right? While those greater means accrue, it incentivizes people to hoard wealth, right? So if there is a high amount of wealth inequality, then that means that there are a small group of people that are hoarding a lot of the wealth, right? If I am able to hoard wealth without being productive within an economy, then that is not a merit-based economy. It is disincentivizing me to work harder, because if I'm able to just hold on to that money, who cares, right? I'm just going to hold on to it. Then on top of that, it means there are less resources to go around within that community, which means that people at the bottom end of the economy don't have as much money, which if they don't have as much money to cover their cost of living necessities and then have extra money to spend, they aren't buying anything, which means that they can't stimulate the economy, right? Then on even more long-term, right, if people are able to just hoard wealth instead of having to work for it, then it's going to lead to less improvements in products and services, because less people are able to compete. Because if you don't have, as attractive as the idea of being an entrepreneur is, if you don't have extra time, or i.e. extra means to be able to pay for your cost of living while you're working on something else, you can't do it. So we need to have a certain regulation on wealth inequality getting too out of hand, even in a capitalist-driven society, right? And if we believe, if we're going to believe the common rhetoric that we hear, especially, in the U.S., that everyone has a chance at building wealth in the United States, then we should be able to measurably see that in data, right? And that's why looking at the Gini coefficient is important, because if we can look at that and see that, well, if everyone has a chance, then why isn't everyone doing it? Maybe there's a structural issue that we need to look at. So that's why it's important to look at measures like the Gini coefficient, in my opinion. Now, let's share some other perspectives on this and where the United States stands in terms of the Gini coefficient. So G7 nations are 7 of the most industrialized democracies in the world. And those nations are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US, right? And out of the G7 nations, the US is, according to the Gini coefficient, the highest wealth inequality, right? The highest income inequality, technically. They are two different things. And it's only gotten worse, right, in the US over the past several decades. And let me scoot this up for you. Yeah, and it's only gotten worse. So when we're looking, here is 1970, right? And this may be a complicated chart to read, but basically what we're looking at is, okay, middle income people, upper income, lower income. We're looking at, quartiles, so 25% measures. And what we're looking at is, okay, in 1970, middle income in the United States, the middle 50%, right, of people made up 62% of the aggregate income in the United States. That's pretty good, right? That means that the middle class was making more money than their percentile value, right? Because if 50% made 50%, that would be exactly equal. 62%, that's good. That means the middle income people are making a good amount of money relative, in total, relative to their part of the population. Upper income, and we can see that's dropped, right? Now it's below the 50 percentile mark, right? With upper income, we can see it's risen from 29% to 48%. This means 25%, right, was accounting for 29% of the income. Now 25% accounts for 48% of the income. It's past the middle income people, right? Lower income has basically been hosed the entire time, but has gotten even worse, right? So we can see that this is not going on a very good trend, right? These middle and lower income, the average people in the United States, their incomes keep falling while the upper incomes keep rising. So not only is the U.S. already one of the worst of the industrialized nations when it comes to wealth inequality, it's getting worse every year, right? For decades. That's only income. Now let's talk about wealth. So the difference is income is, of course, what you make per year, right? Wealth is how much you have accumulated over time, right? Wealth is much more of the indication of how rich you are. Because if you make, let's use a outlier example. Let's say you're an NFL running back and you make $20 million per year, but you only have a 3-year, you only have 3 years of a career. You're nowhere near as rich as a person that consistently, that is able to, say, buy a $10 million house and then, rent or apartment complex and then rent out those units over time. The latter person is probably going to build more wealth because it's something that is sustainable over the long term and has growth potential. So that matters a lot more. When we're looking at wealth, here's the thing to look at, and this is a more complicated chart, but essentially what we're looking at is that from these time periods, from 1989 to 98, 98 to 07, and 07 to 2016. Now, why are these important dates? 1989, 2000. From 1989 to 2000, there was a big crash in 1987, so around that time. 2000, big crash, the dot-com bubble. 2007, of course, Great Recession. You get the idea. So this is kind of looking a little bit in those time frames of those economic cycles. And when we're looking here, what we can see is that we have the top 5%, right? This is how much, okay, they've gained in wealth since, during each time frame. And we can see the top 5% gained 75% in wealth during this time period. So that's dot-com bubble to 07 to 09 recession, right? Way outpacing everyone else. And then we can see the highest fifth, that means the highest 20% of earners, is that and the fifth are the only people who have gained wealth statistically in the United States since the Great Recession. Everyone else has lost wealth. It's a pretty sobering thing to think about. Especially you should be accruing wealth over time. Wealth should be gained over time. The stock market is up since then. It's not like everyone's 401ks just went down. Yeah. Let's look at a even more perspective, to think about historically. So, well, actually, let's look at this first. So this is income inequality with developed economies. So we can see a little bit more of a, idea of where the U.S. stands overall. And just so everyone's clear, the U.S. is about 37th in the world when it comes to income inequality as measured by the Gini Coefficient. And we can see on here as an example, we have the United States, and we're going to be looking not before taxes and transfers because that's not really indicative. We're going to be looking at after taxes and transfers because, of course, taxes, public policies, those different, different specific policies are going to change drastically between countries. So if you're going to compare, in my opinion, you should be comparing after tax and transfer Gini coefficients, not before. Very important stipulation. So as we can see here, we're looking at, 3.8. So we can see Germany is a full, 10% below basically, because when these are converted to percents, you can see we're about the same as Israel. We're more than Italy, more than France. It's not looking good. When we're looking down here, who's doing the best? We can see, it's right here, 2.4. So Iceland, Norway. I know we hear a lot about them when it comes to dealing with income inequality, in the United States when we're talking about politics. When we look at Canada, it's better than the U.S. It's not as good as those, but you get the idea. This is just a good general place to look when we're looking at all of the overall, where the U.S. stands in the world currently. Now let's look historically, because we want to see, how do economic policies affect this, right? And this is definitely a example that is definitely to get you talking and thinking. So this is looking at, we're looking at what is the share of the top 10% in the United States versus, and this is over the last century, basically, a little over. And we're looking at, how does it change over time, right? And what we can see is we're comparing France, the U.S., and Russia. France is, generally speaking, a heavy social democratic country. So along the lines of what, say, someone like Bernie Sanders would support. Whereas, of course, the United States is, generally speaking, it's, of course, a mixed economy, but generally speaking, leans more towards the capitalist side. And then we, of course, have the USSR, which gives us a great example showing a feudal society, essentially, at the beginning of the 1900s to a, full communist society for a good portion of the 1900s. And then we see it return back to a, much more capitalist society, reminiscent of the United States after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I think it's really important to look at because when we're looking at this is not Gini coefficient. This is looking at percentage owned by the top 10%. So keep that in mind. But when we're looking at this, we can see that, the U.S., it was pretty bad in the 1920s, like really bad during the Roaring 20s, which over speculation in the market, of course, helped lead to the Great Depression. And we see everything come down, right? Well, then we're watching over time. And the New Deal, the Great Society in the 1960s, all that keeps the U.S. going down, right? So we're looking at, the income inequality, at least the amount of income held by the top 10% is going down. And then we notice around 1980, whenever we shift more towards the economic and fiscal and foreign policies that we've had since Reagan, both on the Democratic and the Republican side, we can see it has just steadily climbed, right? That's not a good thing. Not if you care about income inequality. Now, France, we can see over time, it was bad. It dropped. It's been consistently generally dropping, but it's started to level off, right? And then when we look at the USSR, which is, of course, the best case example, in my opinion, because it shows you the drastic swings. You have 1905, which is still when, the Tsar was in power. You see the big drop, and keep in mind that Russia was a feudal society pretty much at this point. You see this huge drop in the amount of income held by the top 10% following the revolution, of course. And then you see that it stays pretty low over time. Once it gets past the 1950s and 1960s, it's pretty low. It's not 10% and 10%. It's not perfect equality, but it was pretty low. And then you see as soon as the Berlin Wall comes down and Western capitalism comes into that country, it immediately shoots back up. And now the United States is actually past Russia, which it's something to think about. And it just gives you a perspective of how different economic policies have changed wealth inequality in these different countries across the last century and a half, basically. Now, to show why we have this change, or at least to display this change a little bit better from late 1970s, early 1980 onward in the United States, I have some other charts I want to share with you guys. So this is where we're looking at, let me zoom this in. This is where we're looking at how income gains have changed over time, right? And this is looking at post-war, talking about post-World War II. The reason that's important is because that's when you had the New Deal and Franklin Delano Roosevelt's different public social safety net programs come in. And we want to see, okay, well, how have things changed, right? And so when we're looking at this, what we're wanting to see is who's benefited, right? And we can see, so that we're clear, 95th percentile, this means people that are making more than 95% of people, right? Median means people that are making more than 50% of people, so basically the average. And 20th percentile means people that are, the bottom 20% of income earners. And as we can see, this is looking at growth of each of those incomes. And we can see it's pretty on point with everyone. From those programs were pretty successful overall, those New Deal programs. You see that it stayed about, so were the Great Society programs. You see it stays pretty good all the way up until about 1975-ish. And then you start to see a bit of a departure. And you start to see that the 95th percentile, i.e. the top 5%, starts making more and more, and it grows more each year. Meanwhile, bottom 50, average person, and bottom 20, they say they move at about the same rate. So every time someone's making more, the top 5% is making more at a faster rate, which is only going to increase and further exacerbate that wealth inequality. When we're looking at, this is showing the income gains, and what we're looking at is, this is for income households, right? So this is since 1980, so a little bit more specific. And we can see it's insane. The top 1% gains compared to the bottom 20%, the next 19, it's pretty bad. So when we're looking, okay, top 1% as an example, this is of course the 99th percentile. So then we're talking about with the next 19, we're talking about the 80th percentile. We're talking about the middle 60%. This is going to be roughly the middle class in the United States. Middle class is generally the middle 50% of earners. And then the bottom 20%. All these guys are getting left behind. That's a pretty big issue if we're caring about wealth inequality. Then if we want to look at, okay, well, what's the distribution of income, right? And we want to see, okay, well, this is looking at before and after federal tax transfers. So we're going to look at after tax because that's what matters more. But let's say you hear people constantly talk about how the richest people pay the most taxes, right? So it's justified. Well, not really, because here's the problem, is when you look here, the top 1% of people, right, are only paying 16% of the taxes. Or at least only getting, they're only paying on 16% of the income. It's not that big of a deal, right? When we're looking at the shares of the pie, this is 1% of people. This is 60% of people. They should be paying more. That's how the system should work. It should work even better, to be honest. And then when we're looking at, okay, well, what is the taxes they pay? Like, oh, they pay so much in taxes. Look at the difference. The difference in income distribution between pre-tax for the 1%, 16%. After, 13%. Where's the big difference? It's not there. It's a lie. They aren't. And oftentimes, because the fact that capital gains is taxed at a lower rate than earned income, oftentimes they pay less in taxes because of those loopholes. And a good example of that would be going back to the classic Warren Buffett line of how his secretary pays more in taxes percent-wise than he does, and talking in the 2012 election, whenever Romney was talking about how he pays only like 11% in taxes. Yeah, it's something to keep in mind when we're talking about wealth inequality and how to fix that. Now, then we're looking at wealth. So wealth is even more of a problem. Like I said before, wealth is more important because it has to do with what you have access to, i.e. how big of loans you can get, right? Look at, like, it's insane. So here's income, right? Bottom 90% keeps about 50%. After taxes, bottom 90% keeps about 23%. The top 1% grew. That's because they're paying less. That's because they're paying less in taxes. That's ridiculous. So anytime someone says that, oh, well, they pay higher rates, so they pay more into the system, they should. They use more of the system. They have way more of the system. And that is always going to cause a big problem within any economy, but it's even going to cause a problem in an economy that wants to be aggressively capitalist, because it's going to end up where you have people that are hoarding money, people that aren't spending money, and it's going to stagnate the economy. And that's why you always see cyclical climbs and crashes every about 4 to 7 years. It's like clockwork. We've had 3 in the last 20 years. It's, it's just an inevitability of this type of a system. So then the question is, well, what can we learn, right? So from this, we can see that the U.S. currently is very unequal, right? And is not serving the interests of the working class. And I think the goal and the point that we should take away from this is that we need to push for policies that will help fix this inequality. And good examples of that, from my perspective, are higher marginal tax rates on top income earners, i.e., the people that are making the most should be paying more into the system. Generally speaking, they're using more of the system. As an example, Jeff Bezos owning Amazon. Amazon uses roads and other public services way more than I or you do. They should be paying a higher percentage. They're using it at a higher rate. Not complicated. Not to mention the carbon output of those companies versus, the average person, and what that effect has on the taxpayer long term, as well as just livelihood of anyone on the earth. But then also another thing to keep in mind is we should have a much higher estate tax and at a lower bracket. Currently, the estate tax or the death tax in the United States only starts at $11.58 million on an individual or $23.6 million jointly. And then it's only taxed at 40%, which to me is silly. For perspective, under Obama, it was taxed starting at $3 million, not at 11.58. And basically what that means is that if you die with $12 million and leave that to your kids, then only the last 0.5% basically will be taxed at 40%. In my opinion, that's completely antithetical to suggesting that we live in a merit-based society, because if you need to worry about keeping, getting 3 million even or 11.6 million like it is now, in order to get by, then you probably shouldn't be wasting those resources, because they could be better used to help other people in society. And I think we need to remove exemptions like the stepped up tax basis. The stepped up tax basis is basically looking at when you buy, and I did a video on this in Biden's tax plan breaking it down, so check that out if you want a more thorough explanation. But basically, it has to do with how property is taxed based on inheritance. And essentially, if you buy something that, a piece of real estate generally, that accrues interest over time and grows in value, and then you die and you give it to your kids, then they will only be taxed on the amount that it gained since they were given it, not since it was purchased, which essentially means that the person who purchased it, you, before giving it to your kids, saved all that money tax-free gains, which there's no reason to incentivize that, in my opinion, in the United States. We have artificial scarcity in housing already anyway. That only benefits. And on top of that, we got to keep in mind that, again, the level of wealth that's required to even get to that point is in the millions. most people in the United States, or anywhere really, but most people in the United States end up dying very poor, if not completely broke. This doesn't benefit the average person. I also think that we need to tax investment income at the same rate as labor income, right? i.e., capital gains tax should be taxed at the same rate as earned income, because to me, it's a travesty that a person working, an industrial job, as an example, pays the same income rates as a person who is, a trust fund kid picking stocks on Robinhood. That's pretty pathetic. And they're getting taxed lower. Why would we incentivize that? That's not adding productivity to our economy, which generally speaking should be the goal of an economy, is to add productivity to make the economy, produce more to better serve the society that it's a part of. And then we need to invest more in social programs that benefit everyone. Whether that's education, other social safety net programs. We need to make sure that people have equal opportunities. And the best way to do that is to help fund programs that, produce those. And the other one we really need is, and this is something that, individuals have to do, is we need better labor power within companies. I know that for me, working in companies that were heavily unionized was a really big benefit. And I'll do a video on that as well pretty soon, talking about like how it is that, you people that are that work at unionized companies make about 20% more than non-unionized companies. The selling of the idea of right to work being a good program for working class people, and the union busting that's been happening over the last, especially the last 3-4 decades, has been terrible for the average working class person. And we need to remember that, that's something we can do within our own, jobs. And then we need to, just call it for what it is. You need to call the system for what it is. It's not meritocratic. I mean, I think we all can agree that no matter what our individual experience is, I think we can all agree that the hardest working people don't necessarily, and oftentimes do not, make more because of that. And I have a problem with that. So I think most people do in their gut. I think that's something that we should look at, and we need to just look at, okay, and everyone's perspective is different, but you should look at, well, what is the goal of an economic system? And I personally don't think that ours is fulfilling that at this time. And I think the Gini coefficient is a good starting point of understanding why it isn't. And now we're going to go back to the chat, and we got one more topic to go. Okay, cool. Kick it with dang. I used Google Scholar for medicine articles, but never thought about using it for politics. Great resource. Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's a game changer, honestly. I started using it a lot whenever I was taking AP European history in high school, because you find a lot of good scholarly articles, and yeah, it's a game changer. And then even if you, other good options are, even if you want to be lazier, is go to like Wikipedia and look at their sources, and then look for the actual source material. And oftentimes those will be peer reviewed, and that's really helpful as well. And then give me one moment, and I will get to the last topic for today. And for anyone that's just joining, I'm going over several topics. I'll answer /respond to any questions or comments in the chat in between topics, but I want to make sure that I cover each one thoroughly. So just be patient for me, and I will get to you eventually, I promise. And then one moment, we will get started on the last topic, which is going to be on some good credit cards that a good credit card setup for the average person, to try and maximize bonus points and miles. Awesome. Okay. Dope. Okay, cool. All right, and the last topic we're going to cover today is going to be on credit cards. So specifically, I'm going to be looking at some credit cards that are In my opinion, really good for the average person. And what we're going to be looking at is let's set up a credit card system essentially where we have, cards for gas, dining, groceries, travel, and then, everything else, right? And I want to look at how to set that up because everyone should be using a credit card over a debit card. There's no reason to use a debit card, in my opinion. Credit cards are far better. I've got other videos talking about why, but you need to in order to build your credit card score anyway. So you might as well. And on top of that, oftentimes they're going to give you money back, whether that's in percentage points, cash back, travel rewards. It's so worth it. There's no reason not to. And to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, when you sign up for a credit card, oftentimes if you hit a certain spending limit, then they'll give you a bonus. And then also when you do spending on certain categories, they'll give you money back on every dollar spent. And to give you an idea of, like, this is not a small amount of money we're talking about. To give you an idea, last year as an example, with Chase bonuses, not even talking about spending points, just bonuses, just sign-up bonuses, I got about $3,000 just from Chase, right, in sign-up bonuses. And all it takes is signing up for credit cards selectively, making sure that they're not ones that have high annual fees that are going to bite you, and making sure that you are responsibly able to pay those off in time so it doesn't end up costing you money. Very important caveat. So going forward, we're going to be talking about this from the perspective of if you are paying off the credit card before the monthly bill is due every month, and we're going to assume you are not carrying any interest on these, definitely make sure to look at the interest rate if you're ever going to do that. And overall, if you don't have to, never carry over charges on a credit card. That being said, I want to talk about how to simplify this for people and talk about some of the best credit cards around right now that have low or no annual fees. And the reason it's important to look for cards that either have no annual fees or you're able to product change to a card with no annual fee is because you don't want to cancel credit cards because it will hurt your credit score. You want to keep credit cards because the average age of credit card history is going to factor into your credit score, and we want that to be as long as possible. Canceling cards hurts that score. So everything on this is going to either be have no annual fee or downgrade to a card with no annual fee. So for the first section, we have a gas card. So gas cards, we all, unless we use public transport in, New York or some city that has good public transport, unlike LA, we all spend money on gas. And gas cards, generally speaking, historically, the goal is to get 5% back on a credit card for gas. And right now, there's only one main credit card that I could find that has no annual fee that does that, and that is the PenFed Platinum Rewards Visa Signature Card. Currently, they get 5% back on gas and 3% on groceries, which is really good. The 5% on gas is the best you're going to find without an annual fee. And to give you perspective, like, that's basically if you spend, say you spend $40 on a tank of gas, you're going to get $2 of that back. So it's not a ton, but it's $2 more than you would have gotten with a debit card. So keep that in mind. On top of the no annual fee, what's really nice is that you get $100 cash back after you spend $1,500 on it within 90 days. The one caveat is that it takes excellent credit in order to get, so you got to have a pretty high credit score. For most people, now, while that's the best percent-wise, personally, I think most people, what they should look at getting is the Wells Fargo Propel American Express card. So the Wells Fargo Propel American Express, it only gets you 3% back on gas, but it also gets you 3% back on ride shares, public transit, travel, and some streaming services. It has no annual fee, and it gives you 20,000 points, which is $200 roughly, after $1,000 spend in 90 days. So it's a pretty sweet one, and with a low minimum spend of $1,000 in 3 months, you should be able to make that. And if you are looking for ways to make that, we'll talk about minimum spends and ways to hit that. But as an example, when I'm looking to make a minimum spend amount, because I'm not going to spend, several $1,000s in 3 months, I usually do it by just paying for my rent with a credit card through a secondary service. The service that I prefer is plastic, and I'll talk about that later. The main thing, though, the reason I say for the Wells Fargo Propel is that it's a really good card overall. It only needs good credit score. So we're talking about, generally speaking, if you're around 700, you'll probably get it, which means it's a little bit more accessible, and it has no foreign transaction fees. So it's actually not a bad card for travel as well, if you want to minimize the amount of cards you have for whatever reason. The next segment is dining and groceries. So with this, generally speaking, 4% is the goal. You're looking at cards like the Capital One Saver, but that has an annual fee, and I don't want to pay an annual fee for this. So what's even better is you don't have to. You can get the Chase Freedom Unlimited. So the Chase Freedom Unlimited is awesome. It's a no annual fee credit card. It only takes good credit, so most people will qualify for it after, successfully making payments on, a secured credit card and or maybe one other credit card. But you should be able to get this pretty early in your credit journey, which is great. It gets you 5% back on groceries, and that excludes Target and Walmart, but 5% back on groceries during your first year on up to $12,000 spend, which I don't know how you would spend that much on groceries personally, unless you have a football team that you feed. And then it gives you back 3% on dining, food delivery, and drugstores. So pretty solid overall. Not quite 4%, but that's pretty good. Averaged out, I personally spend way more on groceries than I do on dining and food delivery. So for me, it's a pretty good option. And then you get 1.5 percentage points back on all other purchases. And something to keep in mind is if you're going to get one of Chase's travel credit cards, like the Chase Sapphire Preferred or Reserved, you'll even get more points because of the 25% and 50% multipliers that the Preferred and the Reserve have. It comes with no annual fee, and it's gives you $200 back after only $500 spent in 90 days, which is pretty great. When you're looking at that's just free money. So overall, that's one of the best cards that you can get, in my opinion, right now. Now, to move on and add on to that with travel credit cards. So for me, the best travel credit card, and the one that I have, is the main one that I have is the Chase Sapphire Preferred. And when you're looking at travel cards, you generally want about 3% to be your goal, 2 to 3%, just better than a 2% everyday card. And the Chase Sapphire Preferred, it gives you 2x back, but, with a Chase Sapphire Preferred, if you use those points for travel within Chase's portal instead of cash back, you get about 25% more on those points. So what this means is that instead of 2% when redeemed for travel, it's 2.5%. So a little bit better. Also, if you have the Chase Freedom Unlimited, like I was just talking about, instead of getting 1.5% back on it, when you transfer those points over to the Chase Preferred, those become 1.875 points. So almost 2%. Pretty great. Well, that's a really big reason to have the Chase Sapphire Preferred. For me at least, because you're getting then effectively 2.5% back on travel and dining. It's increasing the amount of Chase points you have, both bonus accrual points and just credit card reward points. That's pretty worth it. It does have a $95 annual fee, which is definitely something to keep in mind. But within the first year, you'll get 80,000 points if you spend $4,000 in 90 days. And again, the way I do this is by paying for my rent with it. Or the way I did it was by paying for my rent with it. And those 80,000 points, that's between $800 and $1,000 worth of value. $800 if it's cash, $1,000 if it's redeemed for travel. That's pretty dope. That definitely covers that $95 annual fee for at least 8 years before I'm, paying more than I'm getting. That's pretty dope. And that's not even including the rewards. It also, similar to the Wells Fargo Propel, it has no foreign transaction fees, which any travel card you would want should have. It only takes good credit, so most people will qualify. You also get $0 delivery fee for DoorDash orders of $12 or more, which is pretty cool. You get 5x points back on Lyft through March of 2022. And then the main reason to have it, in my opinion, is that you have rental car protection, trip cancellation, bag delay insurance when you pay for any of those things with this card. And that is a game changer because you should never be paying for rental car insurance, and it just makes your life a lot easier. And a lot more, it's just a lot more peace of mind. They also give an extended warranty for an additional year on all U.S. manufacturers, which is another big reason to have a card like this and well worth the $95, in my opinion. Especially when you consider that, say, as an example, when you buy a cell phone, if you were to buy a cell phone insurance plan through like T-Mobile or Verizon, it's usually going to cost you around $120 per year. This is $95. And yeah, it's only for the first, it's only adding a year to that, but that's a better deal than paying for the 120. And then just after that expires, pay for the insurance. Big brain. That's the way to do it. And get around it. And then the other thing it does is it does purchase protection for 120 days against damage or theft. And basically what that is say you buy something and you find out that you jumped on it too early and it's less expensive somewhere else. If it's past the return policy, then Chase will basically pay for it for you to return, which is pretty dope. I've never used it because I'm not very high maintenance, but it's pretty dope to have. And the other key thing to remember that's really important is if you want a little bit more of a premium card, you can always upgrade the Chase Sapphire Preferred to the Chase Sapphire Reserved, or you can always downgrade it to a Freedom card if you don't want to pay that $95 annual fee without losing your points. So it's a really great card. And in my opinion, it's the best one out there for personal cards as far as the bonus and everything else that's included. The backup option for travel cards would be the Venture Rewards from Capital One. That one gives you an unlimited 2x miles on everything, which is pretty dope. You get 50,000 miles or $500 after 3,000 spend in 90 days. So not as juicy as the Chase one, but lower spending, minimum spend, same $95 annual fee. It takes higher credit it takes a higher credit score though. So that's why, again, prefer the Chase Sapphire Preferred. But one thing that is really good about the Capital One is if you don't have TSA PreCheck, which lasts for 5 years, costs around $100. If you don't have TSA PreCheck, which makes your life really easy when you go to the airport, it will give you credit for TSA PreCheck. So if you don't have TSA PreCheck yet, what I would do is I would go ahead and get the Capital One card, the Capital One Venture Rewards, and then I would downgrade it after the first year to probably the no annual fee Venture One card. And then I would just go ahead and apply for the Chase Sapphire Preferred. And then that way I got the TSA PreCheck that'll last me 5 years and more points. So that's what I would do personally. Again, it has no foreign transaction fees, and it gives you 5x miles with Uber Eats. So pretty similar cards overall. But again, Chase, you're getting $300 to $500 worth more of value on the bonus. It's a no-brainer, but I would get both personally. Just spread it out a little bit over time so I'm not being too excessive. If you wanted a little more premium of a card, and for a travel card, and the only reason I would do this is if you really needed, you really wanted to have lounge access at the airport, which is dope as hell. It's amazing because basically when you go to a city, if there's a lounge at the airport, instead of having to wait in the airport terminal, which we all know sucks horribly, you can go to this lounge where basically you go in, they've got usually hot food, they've got drinks, both alcoholic and not, they got tea, coffee, places to lounge around, like couches, reading areas. It's pretty awesome to have. Yeah, it's dope, especially if you're going to do some traveling. This year, obviously, I didn't do any traveling really, so it wasn't, I downgraded and did not use my Chase Sapphire Reserve. But it could be something that's important, that's, good for you if you're someone that likes that. These, of course, come with higher annual fees, talking, $550, which is pretty steep, but they usually get very close to paying for themselves. If you actually look at the numbers, I'll do some breakdowns on them later. But generally speaking, the ones I would suggest are either the Chase Sapphire Reserve, which is better overall for most people. They use priority pass lounges, which generally speaking are more common in the United States at least. And they tend to be better as far as like, the airlines that you can use those points for. And they have better downgrade options because you can always downgrade to Freedom cards, the Chase Sapphire Preferred. So that's the one I would pick for most people, but it depends on who you fly with. If you fly with Delta more, I highly would suggest getting the Delta Sky Miles Reserve American Express card. And it's because if you fly with Delta, you generally have to use the Delta Sky Lounges. And there aren't very many Centurion Lounges, which is the other option with Amex. And Delta Sky Lounges are way better than Priority Pass Lounges, at least in my experiences. So just depends. And they do have a downgrade option as well to a no annual fee card. So again, that's why I would choose that one. I would not get the Amex Platinum, which is the alternative, because it only downgrades to either a $250 annual fee card with the Amex Gold or a $150 annual fee card with the Amex Green. And I'm not getting stuck with any card that I have to pay a fee for the rest of my life. That's for the birds. Now, for an everything spend card. So this is looking at what card am I going to use on everything else, right, that I spend. This is just my go-to. Generally speaking, historically, 2% is the goal. The best ones I can find right now, 2% you're going to get on the Citi Double Cash or the Discover It card. But personally, I would say it's better just to get the Chase Freedom Unlimited. Again, you're getting almost 2% on all purchases when you consider if you have either the Chase Sapphire Preferred or the Chase Sapphire Reserve. You're getting that $200 bonus after 500 spend in 90 days, plus the 5% on groceries and the 3% on dining. If you're wanting to have something that's very uncomplicated for you to worry about, to me, that's the move, personally. So if you were to ask me what is, pick three, right? And let's say you're going to apply for one, every 2 to 3 months over the next, little while. The three that I would go to are the Chase Freedom Unlimited first, because it's the easiest one out of these three to get. And, that's your one for everyday spending. Get that $200 bonus, no annual fee. It's a great card. Then I would go ahead and get the Wells Fargo Propel or the Chase Sapphire Preferred. I think that the Wells Fargo Propel is really good. I like the fact that it gives you a bonus, and it's an Amex card. So if you want to have Amex as opposed to just Visa cards, that's always a good thing to have. A little bit of variety depending on whether places accept Amex, MasterCard, or Visa. But I would definitely go with that, and then the Chase Sapphire, either Preferred or Reserve. I personally don't see that any travel cards are better than those unless you specifically fly with Delta. And then I think the Delta Sky Miles cards are the best for that. So again, those three would be Wells Fargo Propel American Express, Chase Sapphire Preferred or Reserve, and the Chase Freedom Unlimited. With those three, you're going to get most of the benefits that you would want out of, an infinite amount of credit cards. So if you're wanting to limit it, those would be the three I would go for right now. And overall, what this is going to do for you is with these three cards, you'd be looking at, and assuming you went with the Preferred, not the Reserve, you'd be looking at only paying $95 in annual fees. And you'd be getting between $1,200 and $1,400 in bonuses, depending on whether you exchange those Chase points for, for travel or for cash. That is pretty awesome, especially when you consider that means that worst case, if you wanted to, you pay the $95 annual fee the first year, and then you downgrade the Preferred to the Freedom card, then you essentially paid $100 to make $1,400. That's always worth it in my book. Now, for meeting the minimum spend, again, I don't spend enough to make a lot of these minimum spends for credit cards. The way that I do that is I pay my rent with it. And I specifically use a company called Plastic. It's a third-party service. And basically what they do is, since oftentimes landlords will not take a credit card because of the transaction fees, what you can do is you basically pay this third-party service, and then they write a check and mail it to that landlord. To do this, they charge a 2.85% fee, which, yes, that sucks. But the thing to keep in mind is that, say I'm trying to meet the $4,000 spend on the Chase Sapphire Preferred, and I would not make that otherwise, that 2.85% of that is $114, right? So it's going to, it's going to cost me $114, but I'm going to get $1,000 from it. So I'm still gaining $886. It just depends. You got to look at what you're comfortable with, but for me, that's a no-brainer. And definitely check out one of my other videos I did talking about how to pay your rent with a credit card through Plastic, and that'll have a detailed breakdown of how to do it. And there are links below describing all of this so that you can look at these for yourself and see what's best for you. But definitely be getting credit cards and making sure that you're, as long as you're paying them responsibly, they're going to help your credit score, which is something we all need to work on. Awesome. Okay, cool. And that is the last topic for today. And now let's look at the chat and see what's going on. What's up, JoJo? Yeah, Joe was a neighbor of mine growing up, and he's a pretty dope dude. We used to play pickup football and pickup basketball all the time. Yeah, good to see you, bro. And Keenan, what's up? Also, yeah, if you like financial content, check out Keenan's channel. He does a really good job. Yeah, he does a really great job, and appreciate you coming by, bro. Awesome. And with that, nobody has any questions or comments. We're done for today. Thank you guys. Appreciate you coming by, and be on the lookout. I'll have clip videos coming out for anyone that missed any parts, so you'll see every topic covered. And thank you guys for watching, and enjoy the rest of your Monday night.